Good morning, everybody. We have a very particular morning this time. We will reflect on the current situation of energy more broadly point. Today, we know that energy ministers meet in Prague. Next week, heads of state and governments again, EU will discuss energy. And definitely what we have, it is unprecedented issues in energy sector. But if we see the answers towards it, it all tends to go backwards to the strategy that has been called REPowerEU, because even if you see the elements coming out now, it's very much related to the strategy. Definitely since then, things did not come better. They basically came worse. So we have had explosion in pipelines. We have last decision to cut oil supply to the markets. We got more problems than less. And definitely now Russian aggression in Ukraine got a new dimension with shelling more and more cities and civilians in the Ukraine. So the situation is getting more complex, but at the same time, we need to be consistent in our answers, and we have a blueprint, but it's important that this blueprint is brought to action. And we have a privilege today to have a Deputy Director General from DG ENER, Matthew Baldwin, with us. Matthew has a long experience dealing with the crisis. He has been in cabinet of President Barroso, and Barroso had plenty of crises to deal with. He worked also with Commissioner Hilk, with Commissioner Lamy, and then also in DG Move worked with a more perhaps easy part, but still very challenging really to make this transition to sustainable future. But now he's in a way in the epicenter of the storm and trying to deal with this. So Matthew, we are very, very happy to have you here. We would definitely encourage our audience to write the questions as much as possible, because this is really opportunity to get also some type of insight, what you think about the issues, what are the key worries that you have. But I would start with giving Matthew the floor for a short introduction on where things are going. He is particularly working with this EU energy platform. So Matthew, you could design your intervention as much as you wish. And then my colleagues, Ilaria Conti and Christopher Jones, will start putting the questions on you. I know not all the questions could be answered, but it's definitely a lot of hopes we put on DG ENER and the European Commission in particular. And I assume all Europeans do this. Matthew, nice to have you here. And please, you have the floor now.
Dear Andris, dear friends, it's wonderful to be with you today. And thank you for that extremely generous introduction. I think you're forgetting one small part of that story, which is your own role, Commissioner, as Energy Commissioner, and it was a great pleasure to serve you. And yes, we did have one or two crises which we went through together with President Barroso, and Chris was also, of course, part of that story as well. But we are in, as you put it, in a very typically understated way, Andris. We are in quite a situation. And I thought it would be useful to begin, before we launch into the whole crisis and what we're trying to do, to just step back for a second and ask ourselves, what are the key tenets of a modern energy policy? And indeed, the tenets I've learned sitting at your feet, Andris. I think everyone in any policy in this context, we're trying to ensure a secure and affordable, and of course, a sustainable energy supply and an energy policy. Let's analyze that from a critical perspective. And what I love about the EUI and the FSR is that we're never afraid of jumping into criticism. So let me try to address them up front. I think one group of critics would say that we've, over the last, pick your time period, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, taken the secure and the affordable objectives too much for granted. And particularly in recent years, they would say that we've set too much store on the sustainability objective, the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55. There's another group of critics that say, particularly looking at the recent times, the last few months, that faced with this energy crisis and the inevitable focus on the price spike and what that's doing to our citizens, what that's doing to industry, on the question of simply whether we're going to have enough gas, that faced with these big challenges, that we're kind of putting the European Green Deal, the whole decarbonization, to one side. So my first comment is, of course, both these criticisms can't be true at the same time. And I would actually argue that these three objectives we've set out you would want in any energy policy, in which we are reiterating, and I'll explain a bit more in the REPower plan. There is no dichotomy between them. There cannot be a dichotomy between them. If we are serious about sustainability, that means getting out of gas and finding our gas from another source at the same time as we taper it. If we're serious about prices, it means getting back control over our security of supply. Those price trends reflect some of the supply challenges that we face. So I really want to put that's my basic message to you today, that we have to play golf with more than one club, and we can. And the whole underlying philosophy of REPower is that we must deliver on the European Green Deal. We must deliver on decarbonization, not as well as if we want to achieve security of supply, if we want to move towards more affordable energy supplies. So if you then consider what we are looking at in terms of REPowerEU, the way this crisis manifests itself, and we are in a war, and the energy community is fighting the most vivid and most difficult part of that economic war, which is how to manage our energy supplies. We must focus on the key challenges, and those challenges manifest themselves, yes, into this ongoing security of supply crisis, which is challenging our whole energy independence, our ability to be autonomous. Secondly, the ongoing price crisis, just the height of prices is causing huge problems, but I think we also must address the volatility of those prices. Again, completely in the Putin playbook. He doesn't just want high prices to squeeze the last drops of lemon out of the remaining gas that's coming to the EU and oil that's being sent to the rest of the world. But the volatility also adds to our uncertainty. The fact that member states don't know almost from one day to the next what supplies will be coming under existing contracts. And then, of course, to remember and never to forget that we are still fighting this existential challenge called climate change. So in that context, the REPowerEU sets out a triangle of policy groups of concerns. Firstly, how we diversify our energy sources. Secondly, how we can reduce demand, which of course is a crucial factor in terms of getting our supply crisis back under control. And thirdly, how we can accelerate on the green energy transition. Let me begin with the third of those elements. Our proposals in May are unashamedly putting our foot to that accelerated pedal. We are looking to drive up our renewables targets from 40 to 45%. We're looking to raise our 2030 targets for energy efficiency from 9 to 13%. If we can agree these soon, and I mean, they're difficult discussions, both with the Council and the Parliament, that's a big step forward. We will, I think, already then be talking about a significant acceleration of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the green energy transition before the end of this decade. But then if you dig down into the qualitative aspects of that, and all we've been talking about in terms of rooftop solar, in terms of speeding up heat pumps, all the work on hydrogen, I don't have time to go into it now, but you know it very well, biomethane. And we are delivering through those both on security, but also, of course, on sustainability. And I just want to say a word on it because the project's still very close to my heart. If we can start to use other vehicles, other levels of government to drive things forward, we have a fantastic project called the 100 Climate Neutral Cities by 2030. So that's another way of looking at the problem, inviting cities that have got the ambition, have got the wherewithal, have got the scale, the population densities to really go at this and to show how it can be done on the ground, bringing the citizens with us. That's a fabulous vector to support the overall efforts of REPowerEU. And I don't think I need to tell this audience why that's so important in terms of the environmental perspective, lower emissions, clean air, of course, slowing down global warming, but the linkages between these issues. Again, if you think about it from a city perspective, if you can reduce the usage of cars in cities, you tackle so many of these things at the same time. You reduce your CO2 emissions, you improve your quality of air, you reduce the costs that come from congestion, from deaths in road crashes. So let's link issues together and drive things in the right direction. From an economic perspective, it's vital. We underestimate, I think, sometimes in our almost ideological stress on the green issues, just how many jobs and how much growth this can generate. At current levels, renewables are considerably cheaper than gas, which is why we stepped in this infra marginal proposal to actually reduce or to tackle some of those rents which are flowing through no fault of the renewables industry. And you know, we need to encourage and use this price signal to trigger the investments which need to come, and these investments will of course be breaking even much earlier. From a social perspective, this is our challenge and our target to get at energy poverty, helping vulnerable consumers to reduce their energy consumption and thereby increase their quality of life. A bit like with transport, simply by increasing the use of energy, you don't necessarily increase quality of life, and particularly not at current price levels. So if you can help people insulate their buildings, install more efficient devices, you can make huge steps forward. And of course, last but not least, there's a massive geopolitical drive behind what we're trying to achieve with REPowerEU. We need to put our hands up here and accept a big mea culpa, or whatever the collective noun for mea is in Latin, I don't know. We have allowed Putin to weaponize energy markets. And we can get out of that by an EU economy which is more focused on renewables, an energy economy which by definition, which will be much less reliant on imports. If you get your supply from a local energy grid, you're clearly a lot more autonomous and safe in your supply than crossing your fingers and hoping that Gazprom will not be turning the tap off overnight. So in all of this, and this is of course a subject close to the EUI's and the FSR's heart, there must be a European role into this. We're not stepping into this for, we're European and we love that and we work in the Commission and we want to use this to leverage power. It's because the situation requires greater coordination and pulling together in order to achieve that. Just one quick word before I want to pick that up and finish with it on what we're trying to do with the energy platform. The money side. Fantastic amounts of money were already planned to be spent through Fit for 55. We in the REPowerEU have taken another look at it. We think that what we're proposing requires an additional 200 or so billion euros to be spent by 2027 on top of the Fit for 55. And again, if we can get that through the pipeline, the financial pipeline in this context, you can look about saving 80 billion a year in terms of your gas imports, 12 billion a year in terms of your oil imports, and 2 billion on coal. So it's money that's very well spent. Of course, it's a combination of public and private funds, and we need to use that public as the trigger to drive public funds. But of course, it's a vital trigger when you're thinking about infrastructure connections, which don't always get immediate reward through the market. So I won't go further into it, but we mustn't forget that money side, and that's why it's very important that the REPower plan actually marches through the Council and the Parliament. Very pleased to see that REPower has now made it through the Council, and now we turn to the Parliament side. But the last thing then, to think about where we can really do things differently. And again, here I'm focusing more on our security of supply and our diversification. The third element of the REPowerEU plan is indeed to find alternative supplies from more reliable suppliers. Andris, I remember when we announced in that crisis with Ukraine and Russia that Russia was proving itself to no longer be a reliable supply, and we hadn't seen anything at that time about just how reliable they were going to be. But also to use this burgeoning international partnership through Gateway Europe to develop real partnerships with new players. Again, the dichotomy, the cynicism which sometimes accompanies our efforts is sometimes rather frustrating. There's no hypocrisy in the European Union going out now and trying to buy new gas. We've always said we needed gas in our pipelines all the way through the energy transition, tapering levels, of course. But now we just need gas from different sources. And that gives amazing new opportunities to suppliers to think about what needs to be generated upstream. And we need to generate that we are also going to be a reliable partner for them in terms of security of demand. It's not going badly, aided, of course, by price, and of course, aided by Gazprom and Putin's shutting down of supplies. But just if you take the first 7 months of this year, and I'm sorry, I haven't had time to check the most recent figures, but just the first 7 months of this year compared to the 7 months in the previous year, we're taking 40 billion cubic meters less of Russian gas. That's a 37% reduction. And pleasingly, a great relief, other gases flooded in. We've had 28 BCM additional in terms of LNG, principally from the United States, but not just from the United States. Again, reflecting market prices, but I mean, I think there's a systematic effort and interest to get into the European market, and an additional 17 BCM from other pipelines, notably from Norway, which is on target to add around half of that figure just on its own. Algeria is exporting more volumes of gas. Our commissioners currently or just leaving Algeria now after a very successful trip to develop that partnership there. I mentioned the US. The US has already exceeded what it pledged to deliver at the level of President Biden in terms of LNG. It's already exceeded that level, and we're only just in October. And we're getting already close to the 50 BCM foreseen in the EU-US declaration of which was actually thinking about towards the end of the decade. Just one other example, we've done a new trilateral deal with Egypt and Israel. I mean, it's lost in the current context of the global craziness we live in. But this deal will bring Israeli gas out through Egyptian infrastructure. Can we imagine that happening? Not 30 years or 20, even 10 years ago. It's an extraordinary deal. And I just yesterday was talking to our Egyptian friends about new partnerships we can do on hydrogen in the context of the COP coming up, racing up on us in Sharm el-Sheikh. But what we're trying to do with the energy platform needs to go further than that. And it's a big ask. We are trying to look at ways in which we can do much more by the way of coordination, ultimately leading perhaps to joint purchase of gas. This is not a new idea. This has been around for some years as a logical way to move forward. And from time to time, people say, well, we can do this on vaccines. We did it on vaccines. Why don't we just do it on gas? And here a little corrective is necessary. Member states don't buy gas. And I can assure you, the European Commission doesn't buy gas. I'm looking out at my office now. I don't see banks of traders and screens. We're not in that business. I would be a very rich man if I was a gas trader, and I'm not a gas trader. So we need to figure out a way in which we can use better coordination to avoid some of the massive overbidding we saw for limited gas supplies over the summer in terms of filling our storages. Of course, I haven't talked about this. This is another very good news story that over the course of this last year, we've really stepped up our storage to provide for the coming winter and winters. We've actually exceeded the storage levels on the previous year, even at the time when the very high price level would normally dictate that your storage levels are running a bit low. We've now exceeded 90%. And we've done that because we passed European level legislation to require that. One of the consequences of that was that there was this dash for gas over the summer, and we need to think of ways in which we can continue those efforts whilst damping some of those unnecessary zero-sum, potentially market distorting things. Of course, my great and learned friends in charge of competition will want to take a careful look at how we do that. And of course, the worst thing we could do in terms of moving towards joint purchase of gas would be to take actions that actually drive prices up. And that is the last thing we want to do. So we're looking hard at that. You will have seen in the widely discussed letter from the President to the European Council in Prague earlier this week. She set out there a number of ideas that we're thinking about. I can't say more now because I've learned over a long career in the Commission that the fastest way to a short career is to over-speculate about political decisions which are still to be taken. But I can assure you that we're taking these ideas very seriously. I can assure you that in all the different things we've been working on this year already, the unprecedented demand reduction plan in the summer, where we've set out a 15% across the board, we're also looking at ways in which we can make sure that delivers. So watch this space on that front too. There's been masses of speculation about where we're going on prices and price caps. And all I can say there is you've seen what the president has said in terms of wanting to put a price cap on Russian gas. And she has also said that we are looking very carefully at other ways in which we can alleviate the burdens of gas prices on our consumers and on our industry, whilst of course remembering, again, that we don't do anything there which reduces our efforts to reduce demand, or indeed endangers our efforts on security of supply. I feel, after a sort of rather random tour through the horizon of REPowerEU and everything that's going on, I'm left leaving you more questions than answers. And I think that reflects the situation we're in. We are in an extraordinarily turbulent time, both in the markets and therefore in terms of public policy. We've got to stay alert. We've got to keep in mind the blueprint, Andris, as you said, the strategy, to make sure that we're going forward in a consistent and a clear way, in a way that respects the markets, that respects the politics of the situation. Our member states clearly need to find ways of addressing the crisis which is affecting their consumers ahead of the winter. We have to be coherent, we have to be clear, and we have to be flexible and reactive to the different pressures. So it's an extraordinary time to work in these areas, and I'm very happy to try to answer any questions that you may have for us, have for me this morning. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Matthew. You have plenty of questions, but we will start with Ilaria, Christopher, and then I see a group of questions already that I could come after with Christopher. So Ilaria, the floor is yours.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much, Matthew. It was not a random, it was actually a very comprehensive overview of the REPowerEU plan, and also of the several questions that each of us is asking indeed in this difficult situation. I already noticed also in the chat some questions regarding one issue, which is indeed very interesting, the energy platform. So my first question would really relate to that. I would like to ask if you could update us on where we are there. And also, particularly, I was wondering, you said, and I very much agree with you when you said that the situation requires greater coordination. So I was wondering, are we already seeing signs of coordination and solidarity, which is very much needed in the work that you are coordinating via the platform? Are we already seeing results, or yes, at what point are we with the setting up of this energy platform? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'd say we're a work in progress. The energy platform was announced in May. We're still getting up to speed in terms of staffing this task force, which has been created here in DG ENER to lead this work. In some areas, I think we've made a lot of progress. We've been doing, as I mentioned, a big international outreach. We've concluded memorandums of understanding. We are reaching out to all different markets. I mentioned the commissioner and my colleague Cristina Lobilo, you'll know well, just in Algeria. I was myself in Nigeria before the summer, and yesterday so day before yesterday in Turkey, looking at a whole range of issues with them. So that part of it is going quite well. I mean, the fundamental issue we face on that side is that there's only a limited amount of gas out there in the market that's not been contracted. One gas company put it very well. If you think of the amount of gas out there as a constant level in the bathtub, and it's swilling around the bath, and partly because of our efforts, but more realistically also partly because of prices, the water's swilling up more on our side of the bath. So we've been able to bring in additional gas, as I mentioned, through the course of this year. But you know, the amount of LNG is finite, and one of the things we haven't talked about yet is, of course, we've not seen the Chinese economy return to full vigor since COVID, which has had somewhat of a dampening factor, experts say, in terms of Asian LNG prices. At some point, that may well change, and the water may swill to another side of the bathtub if we're not careful. And by the way, I should acknowledge in passing that swilling metaphor has also affected the developing world, the global south, very severely. Countries such as Pakistan and Sri Lanka have suffered shortages because they cannot pay the eye-watering prices that we have been paying on gas in the course of this year in Europe. And we should remember that. We are in a difficult situation, but we're still in a privileged situation in terms of being able to pay those prices. And we need to be careful that we are not doing what some people say is happening inside Europe, that the rich do better and the others lose. But that leads me to address this question of solidarity. And I don't want to be ungenerous to the member states, because at the end, governments need to respond to their voters, and they need to try to secure their own energy supplies and deliver their own energy security. But if we're not careful, it can become a zero-sum game. And that is why I think this energy platform can be so important. And we're starting to talk with the member states, with gas companies, about how we can do much more in terms of coordination, how we can do much more in terms of aggregating demand as a precursor, as a first step towards joint purchase. And I think you can expect some moves forward on that, some announcements on that in the near future as to how we can actually make that happen. And remember that aggregation of demand sounds like a big step. It's a first step, a necessary step towards joint purchase. It doesn't in of itself require gas purchase, or it requires member states and therefore also companies to look at what their needs are going to be. That could then be taken into the next stage, which will be a tender. But of course, gas companies wouldn't be committed to purchase gas until they're satisfied on the volumes and the conditions and of course the prices that would pertain. So we're working through those processes. Next week, we're having the first meeting of our industry advisory group, which I think will be a very significant moment, because we hear from all the different sectors of industry there. And we have a rich group of companies, plus a number of others who will be joining us as observers. We've had several detailed discussions with member states, and we'll move forward. And as I say, watch this space for further announcements. One particular thing which I think you can expect to see us focusing on is the question of storage filling, which again has gone very well this year. But if we have a tough winter, if we have a total cutoff of Russian supplies, if we see some uncertainties in the LNG outlook coming from the Asian situation, or another fire in a big facility as we saw in the US this year, or a reduced supply from somewhere, our storages could be in a difficult situation in the first half of next year. We need to prepare for that. My metaphor is that Europe must be ready, and Europe will be ready. My slogan, I'm sorry, not my metaphor. And that is the focus in which we'll be bringing through the energy platform, I hope, to support all the efforts on security of supply and to enable Europe to be ready for next year.
Thanks, Matthew. I mean, most of the questions I want to ask you, I know you can't answer, so we'll go somewhere else.
Oh, well, don't ask me those then, Chris, please.
I know people are really interested in the industry, so I've got 3 questions for you. I know everybody's really interested on the industry advisory group, and I think we'd be really interested to hear what exactly do you want to achieve from this group? In particular, for example, will you use it to, if you like, market test the stuff that you're going to be doing on prices and mechanisms in the future? Because whenever at the FSR, we've sort of market tested some of our price ideas with traders, for example, they tend to pull them apart quite quickly. Because it's, most of these pricings, when you play with the market, you're playing whack-a-mole. So every time you solve one question, another question pops up. So what are you trying to get out of the industry advisory group? Second, just a simple factual question. In the last regulation, it said the Commission would be giving some guidance in relation to the application of the inframarginal pricing system, inter alia, and member states have to implement it by, I think it's the 1st of December. Be really interesting just to know when guidance will be coming out, because I know a lot of people are very interested in how this works. And the third one, if I could go back to the platform, isn't there a contradiction, a difficulty, which is if the platform works well, which we all hope it does, and it becomes increasingly effective, covering more and more of the EU's gas demand, and therefore helping to avoid price competition, as you said so very well, and helping push down the price. As you push down the price, demand will go up, obviously. And there we will be in a situation of a shortage of molecules. And the fundamental problem that we have with many of the ideal approaches, if you like, is how do you allocate scarce molecules between member states? As you said, solidarity at the end of the day. And so my question at the end of the day is, how would you see this solidarity issue playing out? How can one address it? Because that is the holy grail in terms of solving the real end game of the platform's success.
Oh, great questions. And nice to see you again, Chris, too, as a fellow partner in crime from the days we were talking about with Andris. Let me be quick on the second one. I don't know. I have this thing that the commission officials never like to say, I don't know, because we always like to have the answer for everything. And I'm rather, particularly in my early days in this job, I'm very happy to say I don't know, and I will check when the guidance is coming out and get back to you. On the industrial advisory group, part of my answer is we're going to suck it and see a bit. We're going to see what this group can bring. Some people have said to me, it'll never work, get 40 people from such diverse areas of industry in a room together, they're all going to clam right up and no one's going to want to say anything. Well, I hope not. I mean, I want to see a group which works in a very vivid way. And by the way, that doesn't just turn to the commission to sort of staff it and drive it. I want this group to drive itself a little bit, to say, these are the things we want to see in industry. Now, there will be some limits on what we can do, whether it's the overall legal environment or indeed competition rules, but it's a group for the use of the people who are joining it and not just for our use. Will we use it specifically to market test? I suspect not, if you mean in a formal sense, in a group of 40 people. But I do think we can start to use this to market test in a more informal way, certainly in these early days of the platform, the ideas that we have in broad terms, whether they're workable in terms of the market. All three of you know much more about the gas market than I do, I'm ashamed to say, and that will probably be the case for eternity. But I'm not pretending to be the one who knows exactly how this could or should work. And we need to hear from industry, not just from a theoretical reason, because they're the ones who will have to make this work. If we're going to move in a direction of more coordination and more solidarity, and I'll come to that, and try to bring the benefits of things like joint purchasing into our gas market, they're going to have to own this challenge every bit as much as we do. On the platform then, yeah, and you put the dichotomy well. If the platform works well, will we push down prices, and therefore will we reduce our ability to ratchet down demand, which we now have to do? First point is, I don't want to exaggerate the ability of the platform through, let's assume we have all singing, all dancing gas purchases within the next few months. We still have price set, certainly on LNG globally to a certain degree. So the ability of even a large player like the EU, even for, let's say a high percentage of our overall gas purchases jointly, I suspect that the price impact of that might not be so great in the short term because of the global market price system we work in. So I want to measure our expectations on that. I hope that the prices we pay might be less than they otherwise would have been. Let me put it that way, through the platform. But your point is generally right, that if we do things, and here we're talking more about price caps and all the different variants which have been discussed rather openly about them, there is a risk that demand goes up. And that's why it's very important that we accompany all of these measures with further efforts to reduce our demand. Back to our demand package in July. For the first time, we've proposed that there's a mandatory element to that if member states don't deliver on the 15% targets. We're monitoring very, very closely what's going on. It's mixed. It's encouraging in a number of areas, but we're monitoring very, very closely. And please remember that that regulation under Article 122 does set out the chance for the Commission to take mandatory, to make mandatory what is currently voluntary if the things don't move forward. And then you mentioned solidarity, and of course I think that underlies all our efforts. It's in the treaty article of Article 122, and it can mean many things. It can mean better coordination, not just for sort of self-interest through the platform, for example. It can mean at the end allocation mechanisms, as you said, if we go down certain routes, depending on the situation that arrives. And some of those allocation methods, could be necessary quite soon, depending on the policy options we take. And when you do that, then solidarity is real and actual and I think very meaningful. So I'm sorry, that was a rather waffly answer because I can't pin down and tell you exactly when and how solidarity will kick in terms of more specific mechanisms. It's fundamental to the efforts we're doing, driven by the European Council. So at the highest level, the member state leaders are stressing the need for that to happen. And that is the big political impulse behind all of our actions.
Thank you, Matthew. If I would want an energy platform to take the questions and suggestions from the audience, there is definitely questions, do member states want it to happen? Are they ready also to deal with the aggregation of demand? What needs to be done until next season starts? Then there is also the question, do we talk with Norway about it? Will it cover also LNG? And there is, do we know also experience from Alberta, Canada? So because there is a joint procurement of gas, definitely it is inside one country, one province, but at least there is a example where it goes, and it happens. So I think that is one block of questions, Matthew, if you could reflect if something is interesting from it. But there is another block of questions asking more on these transitions that you ask. They are basically goes in two directions, the questions, as you would expect. From one side saying, are we aware of new risks? New materials, risks of supply chains, etc. So how much Commission is aware of this and could be a Brexit? But the other group actually says, well, should not Commission be more aggressive? For example, in really trying to cut some shortages in supply chain for heat pumps. So would not be more aggressive policy should be proposed to really to accommodate this change? So this is a second group of questions where the audience very much looks risks and actions that are needed. So I will stop here and then we will have time. So we'll go next round to Ilaria and Christopher. So Matthew.
Thank you very much, Andris. You've used the American sense of the word aggressive. I always like to say to my American friends when I went in there and I was really aggressive in there, and I say, so you hit him. But in using that American sense of the word, meaning I think assertive and really pushing forward with what needs to be done. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a slavish European Commission official. I don't think anyone could have been more assertive and upfront than our president in trying to address this crisis, in not just in what she said in the State of the European Union, but in terms of her, behind the scenes. I can tell you, she's driving this policy forward on a daily basis, precisely looking at what needs to be done. We have to be ready to do everything that needs to be done, and there's no fear of leadership in this institution. I can assure you of that. And so when it comes to things like heat pumps, rooftop solar. Again, I think we have already been quite aggressive in your sense of the word, Andris, in Fit for 55, and we've ratcheted that up further through REPowerEU. We're very pushing on this stuff, and I was in a panel in Istanbul on Monday, and people said that there's somehow a dichotomy between what we need to do in decarbonization and what we're doing in terms of the Green Deal. Again, I don't see a dichotomy there either. We know that gas is a fantastic transition fuel. We've always said that, and we're always going to need it at the end. We want to move on from gas by 2050, but we really are moving, I think, in those directions. On the question of new risks and new supply challenges, that's absolutely right. And there's things that are surprising me every day as I stumble up my learning curve here. I think this could be in the category of famous last words. We have uncovered what Donald Rumsfeld would say. We've uncovered most of the known unknowns. We know where the challenges are coming from. I don't think there's much more that Russia could do that could surprise us. I stress we don't know yet what happened to Nord Stream 1. And I just saw news reports before joining you that there's a leak in the Druzhba pipeline in Poland. Of course, the Friendship pipeline, and I don't want to speculate about that, but it looks like another coincidence occurring to Europe's infrastructure. That is an area where you have to be extremely vigilant. But I think more generally, in terms of the normal Commission work, in terms of anticipating challenges in our supply chain, we're working really closely with colleagues in DG GROW in the whole single market area, the critical raw material side, which is so important. And we do want to ensure that our supply chain in a broader sense is also free of the same dependence that we've seen in terms of energy, which with such damaging consequences. Going back to the platform then on, do member states want it? Well, that of course is the $64 gazillion question. At the level of the European Council, there's no doubt of that appetite, and there has been for some time, strong pressure. It does get more difficult as you go down the political food chain, if you like, for understandable reasons, because you can see the complexities and the challenges that it poses to the normal operation of our gas market. Our message is, from the president downwards, is it's quite clear that the market isn't functioning so well now. And it's not a question of sweeping the market aside, but doing what we can to help the market function. One big gas company said to me that if we could launch a tender for a big tranche of gas around 60 BCM into the market now, whether joint or otherwise, that could be the trigger for a number of final investment decisions, which are currently languishing a little bit in different parts of the world, including in the United States. And so, this argument was this could be a trigger for the whole market to get moving again and to start to expand the prospects for more LNG becoming available in the second half of this decade. So I don't know. The most recent discussions in the Energy Council suggest to me that there is much more appetite now from member states. Certainly from the smaller ones, and I think also from the larger member states. They can speak for themselves about their readiness to do that, but we are talking to them on a daily basis. Are we talking to Norway? Yes, we are. Norway's delivering us now an increased volume of gas. They are a trusted and reliable supplier, and you will have seen in the margins of Prague that the President and Prime Minister Støre announced a joint statement on the importance of tackling prices and gas, and enshrining and ensuring the role of Norway as a trusted and reliable supplier, and talks will continue on that side. And last but not least, and this goes to our willingness to learn and to understand everything that's going on, we have been looking at examples of other joint purchase. Japan, for example, has been doing it. You mentioned Alberta, and that's homework for me. I'm not embarrassed to say I'm not aware of it, and we will definitely look into that. And that's an intriguing example, right, of course, at the heart of Canada's oil and gas industry. Thank you for these great questions. I'm sorry, I haven't chance to see them online, but I count on Andris' ability to bring them.
Yeah, I tried. Now I will pass the floor to Ilaria.
Yes, I would like, moving slightly away from the platform, thank you very much for all your replies. I would like to move to another important part of the REPowerEU plan, which is energy savings. So it looks that many of the member states are now off track for their 15% demand reduction set in the Safe Gas for Safe Winter communication, which was published last summer. So achieving this target seems quite difficult at the moment, particularly as it will become even probably more difficult in case consumers will start then receiving the relief packages being prepared, so the direct intervention support to consumers. So what's your view? How do you see the situation? Do you think we will manage to meet this target, and how to prepare for this winter ahead? Because we know that reducing demand is definitely a very important part of the plan.
Yes, thank you, Ilaria. Great question. So just to remind ourselves, it's a two-step process. In the first step, member states have been asked to reduce their demand by 15% from the beginning of August to the end of March. That's the measuring time compared to their average gas consumption over the last 5 years. This, at this stage, is a non-binding target, and member states are free to choose how to do it. We hope they will follow the guidelines in the European Demand Reduction Plan, because this way we can avoid the sort of wanton demand destruction that comes from an indiscriminate use of the price, if you like, and we're worried about some of the key industries, fertilizers, chemicals, and so member states can shape the demand reduction within, and I hope they'll follow those suggestions. We've seen some really interesting suggestions and some practices which have been going on. Campaigns to voluntarily reduce indoor temperature in households. In the EC, we're keeping our thermostats a bit lower, in our buildings, leading, I hope, by example. We've seen a number of member states announcing a number of different voluntary measures to reduce gas demand, and this has enabled more injection into storage. But the regulation also has as I mentioned, the opportunity to declare at any given moment what we call in this an EU alert. And that says that if the security of supply situation deteriorates further, if it's going to lead to an emergency, then we go to the binding reduction of gas demand of 15% on a binding basis. That's when we really step in. So in that end, member states are requested to update their emergency plans by the end of September to indicate what they're doing. They have to notify these to the Commission by the 31st of October, and these deadlines, are what's written down. But in reality, there's a constant dialogue and exchange going on through the gas coordination group. The key thing is that we take as our assumption that there is no Russian gas coming in. We also have built into our assumptions that we have a tough winter and the LNG supplies don't flow. So we're trying to hold ourselves to a high benchmark. So when you look at it, the big member states, of course, will affect the overall pattern of demand reduction more than others. So, the largest 6 or so member states, if they come in above a 15% reduction, particularly countries like Germany and Italy, who are the big consumers, then we're certainly going to be on trajectory. But also, please remember that the gas trajectory, so the trajectory of demand reduction is 15% for the whole period until the end of March. It's not necessarily the case that we'll achieve it every month, or that we need to achieve it over every month. In reality, I think you'll see higher reductions kick in that period, November to March, because remember, it's against the benchmark of the previous 5 years, because that's when gas consumption is naturally much higher, and that's when measures to reduce it can generate more savings. The multiple sweater option. And again, this isn't the Commission with its long wagging finger saying it's all easy, put on another sweater. But this is what member states are starting to get their citizens to think about. So we are looking also at the relief packages which have been announced, and we are as concerned as one might be to see that those don't impact on the demand reduction goal. I think we have to recall that prices have increased so much that everyone is thinking about how they can reduce their demand. Anecdotally, I don't know anyone who's not thinking about it. And if there's advice that I could offer, it would be that packages should focus on trying to help vulnerable consumers and help our economy cope, rather than simply reducing the price on the bills. But I know that it's a difficult ask, and politics is tricky. So I'm afraid that's my answer. I'm conscious that I'm sidestepping because I just don't want. I don't think it's helpful to give you too much a running commentary on exactly how we've got to on this. I cannot tell you enough just how high our efforts are and how high the efforts of member states are in very good cooperation to tackle this hugely important question. Which, if we can get that right, it's really the key to unlock the door in a number of other areas.
Matthew, before giving the floor to Christopher to the final question, I would like to say where the audience are. I was looking through the questions just for your knowledge. I think there is enormous support for the EU energy platform. I think it must be done. If you feel that how the questions are being formulated, it's also true that this willingness for energy platform is that it should not forget Western Balkan countries, the countries that are in energy community, that they should not be made called. And then there is also link with developing economies you mentioned, like Bangladesh, which loses out in a price struggle. So what type of support could be made? I think that is one block. And that's definitely, it's not just because a crisis usually provokes new opportunities, but I believe the audience really feels that we have no way out of the crisis without success of the EU energy platforms. That I think is. There are two areas where I don't want you to go in, but it's important for your colleagues to look upon. One is biomethane. Biomethane divides opinions here, as I've seen. It is very much for and against, but it seems that the current policies does not satisfy neither camp. So I think that it is. And then there is more work, I think, is needed for simplifying the procedures, because I saw quite a lot of emails with the questions in the box about environmental impact assessment. And I think there is wrong perception that Commission is trying to abolish it. But I assume that there is quite a more communication need really to deliver it. At least I'm not aware that Commission tries to limit the scope, but it's only just to streamline the procedures. But I think there's some communication is needed more. And now for final question, I pass the floor to Christopher.
Could I just, before you do?
Yes, sure.
Just firstly, thank you very much, Andris, for your comments about the platform, and through you, the people who have expressed their support. I'd love to see the questions if someone in FSR could send them over so I can look at them and try to answer them as well if we have time. But I also, because I want to learn, we are, the Commission doesn't have all the answers. We desperately need to learn from others, from the academic side, from industry, of course, and try to find the right pragmatic step-by-step thing. We're not approaching this in an ideological, it's got to be done this way approach at all. And so through you, thank you very much for this session and for future exchanges. Quickly on the Western Balkans, I should have mentioned it, absolutely. That's been paramount from the European Council from day one, that we include the energy community in these discussions. I met on Monday afternoon the minister from North Macedonia, and they clearly have massive issues and concerns, as does the Southeast Europe. We haven't had a chance to talk about it, but that is such a pivotal area in terms of overall energy security. Briefly on environmental economic assessment, I think there's some confusion out there. We have to look at the permitting question in terms of moving more quickly ahead on renewables. And that is not to say we sweep aside careful assessment of what's been going on, but we just look at ways of streamlining the processes so that we're not stopping the advance of wind farms and the solar panel parks and so on, or we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot. We do need to be, back to your word, aggressive, or at least assertive about these things, and think about ways we can ensure that there's proper consideration, but where it's justified, rapid approval and rapid investment and building of these. Otherwise, we ain't going to win this battle. Sorry, I've taken up the time that Chris was going to use for the last question, but if I run out of time, thank you very much for those thoughts, and what a wonderful chance to discuss this with you. Chris.
Thanks, Matthew. A tricky question for you.
Well, I'm running out of time then. I've got to go. Oh, go on.
I guess when you go to Algeria, United States, Nigeria, and say, invest more in gas for us, the question is, but you only want it for 5 years. You're telling us that you're going to have a gas phase out date in the Parliament. You never talk about carbon capture and storage. It's the ugly orphan of European energy policy. There's no long-term vision of what we will do with our gas.
Great question.
How do you answer that? Because it's a balance that possibly in the past we haven't been looking at enough. Now we see. How do you answer that?
Well, it's a great question. I'll make it even harder because sometimes I'm accused, I was in Nigeria, not by the government, but by in press questions of hypocrisy, So you've been telling us, to embrace the green transition and to do all those things, and now suddenly here you are saying, give me your gas, etc., etc. So again, it may be tricky, but I don't think there's a dichotomy. Once again, we're getting out of Russian gas, and that means we're going to need the same amount of gas, a little bit low on repower projections, but we're going to need gas from new sources. That is an opportunity for countries like Nigeria and Algeria to sell what is an extremely valuable resource, to work with us on methane issues, and we've got. I hope we can advance on the methane partnerships in the context of the COP, but at the same time to generate sufficient cash flow for investment in the green transition, and that's a huge advantage that a lot of these countries have. And Nigeria is a great case in point. They can directly transfer to drive their activities forward in hydrogen production, in biomethane. We talked about all of these things, investments in renewables to prepare for the longer term. And by the way, yes, we are interested in buying gas for the rest of this period. There's a huge thing out there that, oh yeah, European Union doesn't want to touch long-term contracts. I mean, 70% of the gas we take from Norway is under long-term contracts, which is actually more than proportionate to the normal amount of gas that Norway sells. Sorry, they sell more on the spot market to other countries than us. We are not afraid of long-term contracts, and we've sent those signals consistently to the US supply industry and others. Remember also that a lot of the way our European gas companies buy gas is from midstream or portfolio players, aggregators. And they can parcel up gas into all sorts of different contract sizes. You pay more for a shorter contract. We understand that. But so it's not a blocker in this discussion. It shouldn't be a blocker in terms of final investment decisions, which are needed. And last but not least, yes, we can embrace these new methods. There's been, I know CCS goes through waves, and I have to learn carbon capture, utilization and storage, is going through waves of approval. I think it's on an it's on an up wave. My English is leaving me. We have a big CCS event in Norway at the end of this month, which we're enthusiastically joining. It's not a technology without its issues, and maybe we rushed at this earlier in the millennium and thereby triggered some concerns. I think we've got to address this in a grown-up way. There are interesting ways we can use this mass of CO2 in creative ways. So I really want to finish by underlining our openness to new methods, to new ways of addressing this challenge. There's no one single answer. We've got to use all the tools at our disposal. We want to do that in partnership with our neighboring countries and with far off countries. We'll only succeed if we do that in a humble way. If our message has sometimes been, forget gas and forget oil, that's all done, and we're only interested in we need to recalibrate that to explain that we are interested in gas from new sources to replace the gas we're getting from Russia. And we want to do that in a friendly partnership context. I'm out of time. I've talked too much.
No, I think, Matthew, I would end. I would like with your last sentence. I think that was a real pleasure hosting you here, and definitely we wish all the success in your work. And definitely us and our audience would be very helpful in you to get some type of feedback. What society thinks about it. So, just to get to understand where Commission in this very complex environment are striking the right notes and where more education or some more encouragement is needed. So I think this is a very crucial period for the unions that will shape our futures, not only our lives, but also next generation. So it is really something that we have no option of failing. So that is very clear. So thank you very much, and much appreciated your participation. And also thank you for the audience and for your questions. So Matthew kindly said that he or people will have a look on the questions you ask, and when they will consider that it really deserves the answer, they will do it. So thank you very much, Matthew, and all the success for you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone at the EUI, my friends at the FSR. To be continued.
Thank you.
For sure. Thank you.